power does not reveal itself in what you give, but in what you withhold. The void terrifies men more than chains, for in emptiness they see their own hunger reflected. When the ruler withholds his hand, when he offers silence where others beg for words, when he offers absence where others crowd with presence, it is then that men give him everything they own, if only to fill the abyss. The masses crave certainty, as the drowning crave air. Yet certainty is the most expensive gift a ruler can give, for once it is granted, they believe themselves secure, and security breeds insolence. Leave them instead in suspense, and you hold them suspended. It is not cruelty, but geometry power rests not in abundance, but in scarcity, not in flooding their thirst, but in rationing each drop until they kneel to drink. Every leader must learn this. Men love the giver, but they obey the one who denies. Generosity wins hearts for a day. Restraint binds loyalties for a lifetime. When you provide nothing but the outline of promise, they rush to paint it with their own desires. They see in your silence what they want to see. And so they serve a vision that does not exist, one you never had to create, one you never had to defend. The void is the most powerful stage in politics. It is theater without actors, war without armies, conquest without blood. When the throne stands empty, factions devour one another for the chance to imagine themselves upon it. When the ruler speaks nothing, every whisper becomes scripture, every gesture becomes a command. To govern through the void is to make others prisoners of their own imagination. Fear thrives in uncertainty. The sword raised but not descending commands more obedience than one already red with blood. To punish is to satisfy. To threaten without end is to enslave. Men will endure hardship if they know its measure, but they crumble under uncertainty, for it has no walls, no limits, no horizon. The ruler who understands this commands more with silence than with decree. Exile taught me this truth. Stripped of my office, removed from my city, I carried no armies, no wealth, no throne. Yet even then, silence was a weapon. For those who feared I might return, clothed me with more power in their minds than I ever possessed in reality. They prepared defenses, forged alliances, whispered in the shadows against nothing but a ghost. Absence made me dangerous. The void gave me form. In the art of power, loyalty is not bought with gifts, but carved from necessity. When men need you to resolve their uncertainty, they become loyal beyond reason. And when they fear the void you command, they will fight each other to remain in your light. This is why rulers must resist the temptation to give too much, to speak too often, to reveal too clearly. Each word spent is coin gone forever. Each truth exposed is armor stripped from the body of the state. To offer them nothing is not to abandon them. It is to bind them with invisible chains. It is to let hunger grow until they beg for crumbs. And in their begging, they give up everything: their trust, their labor, their loyalty, their freedom. What they cannot calculate, they cannot resist. What they cannot predict, they cannot escape. A prince, a president, a general, a leader of men all stand before this law, the law of the void. Appear generous, and you will be envied. Appear open, and you will be betrayed. Appear predictable, and you will be replaced. But remain an enigma, and they will exhaust themselves trying to read the shadows you cast. They will spend their strength chasing what does not exist, and in that exhaustion, you reign. The void is not emptiness. It is the stage on which men reveal themselves. Some rush to fill it with flattery, others with rebellion, others with desperate obedience. The wise ruler watches in silence, and by their reaction to nothing, he knows everything. When you offer them nothing, they give you everything. Their loyalty, because they fear to lose you. Their obedience, because they cannot calculate your intent. Their love, because they must invent a story to explain your silence. And their hatred too, but hatred that burns itself to ash against a wall that does not move. Remember this law. It is colder than steel, sharper than treachery, older than virtue. To govern is not to fill the world with promises, but to create the void in which promises are born. To command is not to answer, but to leave them waiting. To rule is not to give, but to withhold until the hunger becomes worship and the silence becomes law. The void does not betray. The The void does not decay. The void does not age. The void is eternal, and through it, so too is power. The void teaches us that men are most easily ruled not when they are satisfied, but when they are left uncertain, when they are forced to imagine what they cannot see, when they are compelled to invent meanings where none have been given. Satisfaction breeds rebellion, but uncertainty breeds dependence. A people given what they want quickly turn to ingratitude, but a people left waiting remain suspended in your orbit, their eyes fixed upon you for the answer you refuse to provide. In this refusal lies control, for they will give their strength, their wealth, their devotion, and even their dignity to close the gap you have created. A ruler who fills every silence with words weakens himself, for each word becomes a weapon in the hand of another. But a ruler who lets silence stretch like an endless horizon forces every man to reveal his own mind. The ambitious will speak too much, hoping to seize what you have not given. The cautious will remain quiet, fearful of misstep. The loyal will invent reasons to justify your silence, defending you without being commanded. Thus, the void divides them while binding them to you, for they cannot unite against what they cannot define. Men are creatures of narrative. They fear the absence of meaning more than they fear pain, for pain can be endured, but meaninglessness is unbearable. By offering them no explanation, no certainty, no gift of final clarity, you compel them to construct the story themselves, and once they have written it, they become enslaved to it. The greatest deception is not to lie, but to allow men to lie to themselves in your favor. And the greatest power is not to command, but to stand silent while they command themselves. The throne itself is a void, a seat that has no essence of its own. It is a piece of wood, a fragment of stone, until men kneel before it and call it power. It does not radiate authority by its nature, but by the collective surrender of those who fear the emptiness more than they fear servitude. And so the wise ruler understands that he must become like the throne itself, not overflowing with promises, not bursting with explanations, but fixed, immovable, inscrutable, compelling men to see in him what they cannot live without. It is better to give them a shadow than to give them substance. Substance can be measured, judged, criticized, and discarded, but a shadow cannot be held, cannot be weighed, cannot be proven false. Men will fight for the shadow as fiercely as they fight for bread, because the shadow carries the weight of their own imagination. Bread satisfies the body, but the shadow intoxicates the soul, and the soul once captured is a fortress that no army can breach. You may believe loyalty is secured through kindness, but kindness is a chain that breaks at the first test. Men love the generous ruler, but they do not fear him, and without fear, loyalty is fleeting. But when you withhold, when you deny, when you let them taste the sharpness of absence, they cling to you with desperation. They turn to you as the only source of relief from the hunger you have permitted to grow. And in this hunger, they give you everything, not because you forced them, but because you allowed them to starve for the certainty only you can grant. Betrayal, too, is born from excess. The ruler who gives too freely creates debtors who one day resent the debt. The ruler who reveals too much creates subjects who one day despise his weakness. But the ruler who stands apart, who governs through the fog of the void, creates no foothold for betrayal. Those who would rise against him cannot agree on what they oppose, for he has given them nothing solid to attack. They strike at shadows, and in striking, they expose themselves. To command armies is simple, for soldiers obey orders. To command people is harder, for people obey illusions. But to command illusions is hardest of all, for they have no weight, no substance, no form, and yet they bind more tightly than chain. Here lies the secret of the void. When you give nothing, they create everything. When you reveal nothing, they imagine everything. And in their imagining, they give you more than force could ever demand. The cold machinery of politics runs on appearances, not truths. Appearances are masks, and masks are voids given shape. Behind the mask is emptiness, but the emptiness is not weakness, it is strength, because it allows each man to see what he needs to see. One sees hope, another sees fear, another sees salvation, another sees doom. Yet all bow to the same mask, because it reflects not you, but their own desire to believe. The void is inexorable. It cannot be defeated, for it does not fight. It cannot be betrayed, for it makes no promises. It cannot be destroyed, for it exists in absence, not in presence. The wise ruler understands this and becomes the master of absence. He understands that the most terrible weapon is not the sword, not the decree, not the spectacle of cruelty, but the silence that forces men to destroy themselves in their search for meaning. When you offer them nothing, they give you everything, and when they have given everything, they can give no more, and in that exhaustion, in that emptiness, they are yours completely. The law of the void is not a choice, it is a destiny. Those who ignore it drown in the noise of their own abundance, but those who embrace it stand unmoved while the world bends around them. The void is the truest ally of the ruler, because it costs him nothing and yet returns everything. Armies require coin, fortresses require stone, alliances require constant feeding, but the void requires no maintenance. It is invisible, yet it governs men more strongly than visible walls. They look into its silence, and they tremble, for they do not know if it hides a dagger or a crown, mercy or cruelty. The fear of what may be always outweighs the certainty of what is. Thus the ruler who masters absence governs more deeply than the one who commands presence. The psychology of men is simple. They dread being forgotten. They dread being ignored. They dread insignificance. When you give them little, when you turn your gaze away, they rush to reclaim it, to prove their worth, to win back your attention. They will betray their friends, sacrifice their pride, surrender their secrets, all for the chance to fill the emptiness you have left open. In their hunger to matter, they make themselves useful. In their fear of being nothing, they offer you everything. There is no greater deception than to seem disengaged while you are in full control. Withdraw your voice, and they strain to hear your silence. Withdraw your favor, and they fight to earn it. Withdraw your presence, and they magnify it with endless speculation. Each absence multiplies your influence, because men cannot accept that the one above them could ever truly be absent. They invent your presence everywhere, even in places you have never touched. Your hand becomes a ghost moving their world, and in serving that ghost, they serve you. Exile revealed this to me. In exile, I had no palace, no army, no seal of command. Yet the rumors of my return stirred more fear than my rule ever did. Men built walls against my shadow, whispered of plots that did not exist, and pledged loyalty to prevent a downfall that never came. In absence, I was multiplied. In silence, I was magnified. In defeat, I was feared more than in triumph. The void had crowned me more powerfully than the Republic ever had. This is why rulers who cling too tightly to power lose it. They cannot bear the silence. They cannot bear the absence. They cannot bear to be misunderstood. They fill every void with proclamations, every pause with speeches, every gesture with explanation. They give until nothing remains but the hollowness of their own exhausted voice. And when men no longer fear losing them, they discard them as one discards a dull blade. A ruler who cannot withhold cannot rule. A leader who cannot disappear cannot endure. The theater of politics is built upon absence as much as presence. The actor who reveals every line loses his mystery. The actor who holds back draws the eye. So too with rulers. Reveal only fragments. Let the audience complete the play in their minds, and they will become both spectator and participant. They will write the story you never spoke, and once written it cannot be erased. For men cling to the illusions they have forged themselves more fiercely than to truths imposed upon them. The void is not without danger. It is a weapon, and all weapons may turn upon the one who wields them. If silence stretches too far, it becomes suspicion. If absence grows too wide, it becomes abandonment. The art lies in balance, in knowing when to feed a morsel to the starving so that their hunger does not turn to rage. The ruler who uses the void wisely gives just enough to prevent despair, just enough to sustain the illusion, just enough to keep loyalty alive. Too much absence breeds chaos. Too much presence breeds contempt. The equilibrium of power rests upon this razor's edge. Fear is the shadow of the void. To govern without fear is to govern briefly, for love alone cannot bind. But fear must not be born from constant violence, for violence satisfies as quickly as kindness. The lash is forgotten as soon as the wound heals. True fear is born of uncertainty, of the possibility of pain that never resolves, of the threat that lingers like thunderclouds refusing to break. The void holds fear like a vessel, releasing it in invisible doses that poison the mind without drawing blood. Consider betrayal. The ruler who trusts gifts and generosity to secure loyalty will one day be betrayed by the very men he has enriched. They will believe his favor makes them his equal, and equality breeds ambition. But the ruler who keeps them in the void, never sure of his affection, never certain of their standing, leaves them bound by fear of the unknown. They hesitate, they delay, they second-guess their treachery until time itself dissolves their courage. Thus, betrayal dies in the womb, smothered by uncertainty before it takes breath. The void reveals character. Those who seek to fill it with flattery reveal their weakness. Those who seek to exploit it with conspiracy reveal their impatience. Those who endure it with silence reveal their discipline. By offering them nothing, you force them to expose themselves. And in that exposure, you measure who can be trusted, who must be watched, and who will eventually fall upon his own sword. The will to command is not a choice, but a sentence. Once taken, it binds the ruler as tightly as the ruled. For he too is trapped in the theater of appearances, condemned to wear the mask until death. The void that empowers him also isolates him, for he cannot step beyond it without losing the aura it creates. To lead is to vanish into shadows, to become less flesh than phantom, to live as the embodiment of absence. He is present everywhere and nowhere, seen yet unseen, loved and hated, but never truly known. Power is never about possession, it is about perception. The king who holds lands without loyalty is weaker than the exile who inspires fear without armies. The president who speaks endlessly diminishes himself, while the general who speaks once and then retreats into silence multiplies his authority. Men are not ruled by realities, but by the specters they carry in their minds, and the void feeds those specters like fire feeds on air. When you offer them nothing, they give you everything. Their obedience, because they cannot predict you. Their loyalty, because they cannot afford to lose you. Their labor, because they seek to fill the silence with proof of their devotion. And their very souls, because the human spirit cannot endure the abyss. They will surrender everything to avoid staring into it alone. The law of the void is merciless, but it is eternal. It shapes the fate of rulers, republics, empires, and even the smallest circles of men. It is the silence behind the throne, the shadow behind the crown, the emptiness behind the mask. It is the unseen force that bends nations, breaks alliances, and remakes the world. And those who understand it may rule not only over men, but over time itself. The void is the only terrain where the ruler is invincible, because it cannot be conquered by another. Armies may breach walls, alliances may be broken, wealth may be stolen, but absence cannot be stolen, silence cannot be breached. When your strength rests not in what you hold, but in what you deny, you are beyond plunder. No enemy can seize what does not exist. They may rage against your silence, they may conspire against your absence, but in the end, they only exhaust themselves striking shadows. This is why rulers who lean too heavily on material displays of power eventually falter. A fortress inspires attack, a treasury provokes envy, an army tempts betrayal. But the void provokes nothing but fear. It offers no target, no weakness, no clear strategy of resistance. It leaves opponents swinging blindly, never certain if they strike at a phantom or a titan. And in their blindness they stumble, and in their stumbling they fall, while you remain untouched. The human mind is addicted to resolution. It longs for beginnings and endings, for answers and conclusions, for the satisfaction of knowing. Deny them that satisfaction, and you hold them in perpetual suspense. Suspense is not passive. It consumes them. It eats at their sleep. It haunts their steps. A man kept waiting for judgment becomes his own jailer. He builds his own chains out of expectation, and every link tightens around him as time stretches without release. The void is not absence but captivity. and those who dwell in it become prisoners to their own restless imagination. The ruler who masters this law does not need to raise his voice to command obedience. His silence weighs heavier than any decree. A word once spoken can be twisted, denied, forgotten. But silence cannot be undone. It cannot be misquoted. It cannot be revoked. It cannot be erased. It endures like a monument in the mind, a blank stone upon which men carve their own interpretations. Each interpretation strengthens your dominion, for they argue endlessly over what you meant, while you need never reveal what you meant at all. In the game of power, certainty is always a weakness. The moment you are understood, you are vulnerable. The moment your strategy is revealed, it can be countered. The moment your intentions are known, they can be resisted. But when you are unreadable, when your movements seem guided by forces beyond reason, when your presence is felt but not explained, you rise above calculation. Men cannot oppose what they cannot define. They cannot resist what they cannot predict. Thus you are obeyed, not because they choose to obey, but because they cannot conceive of another path. Consider loyalty again. The bonds of loyalty built on affection are fragile, for affection changes with seasons. Bonds built on debt are temporary, for debts can be repaid. Bonds built on fear of the void are eternal, for they never resolve. A subject who loves you today may turn tomorrow. A subject who fears your armies may one day grow bold. But a subject who fears losing what he cannot define, who fears falling into the silence you hold over him, remains bound forever. The void is the only chain that does not rust. Manipulation is not the art of words, but of silences. Every deception begins with what is not said. Every scheme is hidden in what is withheld. The master manipulator speaks rarely, but each silence is heavy with suggestion, each pause filled with possibility. His enemies destroy themselves by trying to read what is not there. His allies enslave themselves by trying to fill what has been left blank. In this way, he governs not through direct force, but through the weight of absence, bending men without lifting a hand. Betrayal is inevitable, but even betrayal bows to the void. A man who betrays a generous master feels justified, for generosity makes him arrogant. A man who betrays a cruel master feels righteous, for cruelty makes him desperate. But a man who betrays an enigmatic master feels cursed, for he never knows whether the silence that follows is forgiveness or a sentence. His guilt devours him, his fear corrodes him, his loyalty is reborn in the ashes of his rebellion. Thus the void punishes more deeply than the sword, for it makes the traitor punish himself. The theater of politics is filled with noise speeches, promises, proclamations, denunciations. But the wise ruler knows that true authority lies not in joining the noise, but in standing apart from it. In a chorus of endless voices, the one who remains silent becomes the most listened to, for silence is rare, and rarity is power. Men lean in to hear what you will not say. They cling to the few words you release, weighing them like gold, debating them like scripture, repeating them like prophecy. Your silence is their obsession, and their obsession is your dominion. There is a cruelty in this law, but it is the cruelty of necessity. To rule is to endure solitude. You must become the void to command through it. You must learn to strip yourself of the desire to be understood, to abandon the need for affection, to resist the temptation of explanation. The more they misunderstand you, the more they serve you. The more they wait for you, the more they depend on you. To seek their love is to descend to their level. To command their fear through absence is to rise above them. And yet the void is not emptiness alone. It is a mirror. It reflects the hunger, the weakness, the ambition of all who gaze into it. One sees hope, another sees terror, another sees salvation, another sees doom. Yet they all see themselves, and in serving what they see, they serve you. You need not invent their illusions. You need only provide the silence in which illusions multiply. The void is the stage, they are the actors, and you are the unseen playwright whose script they perform without knowing it was never written. So the law endures. When you offer them nothing, they give you everything. They give you their loyalty because they cannot bear uncertainty. They give you their obedience because they cannot bear disorder. They give you their devotion because they cannot bear insignificance. and in the end, they give you themselves entirely, because the void consumes all and leaves nothing but the will of the one who commands it. The void is the unseen architecture beneath every throne, the foundation upon which authority rests even when the stones of empire crumble. It is not built of marble, not forged of iron, not written into laws, yet it endures longer than all of these, because it exists in the minds of men. It is invisible scaffolding, binding the ruler to his subjects through expectation and fear. When it is understood, it becomes the strongest weapon of statecraft. When it is ignored, it devours rulers and republics alike, leaving them as ruins scattered across history. Those who rise by noise fall by noise. They proclaim themselves saviors. They flood their people with promises. They reveal every design. They display every ambition. And for a moment they shine. For men love spectacle and are easily intoxicated by abundance. But abundance is heavy. It collapses under its own weight. When reality exposes the emptiness of promises, when excess breeds contempt, when noise becomes unbearable, the ruler who depended on it is cast aside. He fed them too much, and in their fullness they remembered their own hunger for change. But the ruler who rises through silence, through withholding, through mystery, is never exposed in this way. There is no promise to break, no abundance to exhaust, no proclamation to refute. His silence cannot be proven false. His absence cannot be overthrown. He does not tie himself to their expectations, but ties them to his, for they cannot stop waiting, cannot stop hoping, cannot stop fearing. The ruler who feeds them little rules longer than the one who feeds them much. Men will always betray abundance, but they will never betray the void, because betrayal requires clarity, and the void gives none. To betray a ruler whose intentions are hidden is to strike in the dark. The conspirator cannot measure the risk, cannot predict the consequence, cannot know if the silence he defies is empty or filled with retribution. Fear binds his hand more tightly than loyalty ever could. Even the thought of rebellion becomes poisoned by uncertainty, and so he remains loyal, if not in love, then in paralysis. The law of the void transforms weakness into strength. The ruler who lacks armies can still inspire dread if his silence is impenetrable. The ruler who lacks wealth can still appear rich if his scarcity is deliberate. The ruler who lacks allies can still command loyalty if he withholds his favor like a scarce commodity. In absence, deficiency becomes mystery, and mystery becomes fear. What is weak when revealed is powerful when concealed. The void is the shield that turns poverty into majesty and exile into terror. To command appearances is to command reality, and appearances are most easily shaped not by what is displayed, but by what is hidden. The stage of politics is not like the market, where every wares must be shown. It is like the temple, where the curtain hides the altar and the people bow to what they cannot see. A ruler who understands this does not rush to unveil himself. He lets the curtain fall heavy, lets the whispers grow, lets the shadows magnify his form. And when at last he reveals only a fraction, the people see in it the echo of all their own imaginings, and they kneel as if before the divine. The void is eternal, but it is never static. It must be maintained like a fire that burns through absence. Give too little and it extinguishes. Give too much and it consumes itself. The art lies in measure a word here, a gesture there, enough to keep the hunger alive, but never enough to satisfy it. The ruler becomes a physician of the soul, prescribing uncertainty in doses strong enough to bind, but not strong enough to kill. This balance is the essence of statecraft. To know how long men can endure hunger, how much they must be fed, how far they can be stretched before they break. Fear of the void is the purest fear, because it has no face. A man can fight an enemy he sees, can plot against a rival he knows, can resist a tyrant he understands. But how does he fight silence? How does he overthrow absence? How does he resist a presence that is never fully present? He cannot, and so he bows. His obedience is not the result of love, not even of hatred, but of helplessness before the abyss. The void is the battlefield where resistance dies before it begins. Even ambition bows to the void. Ambitious men rush to fill silence, to interpret absence, to seize favor that is not given. In doing so, they reveal their impatience, their greed, their weakness. They expose themselves by trying to expose you, and once exposed, they can be destroyed without consequence, for the world sees not their downfall but their folly. They played against silence and were defeated by their own noise. Thus the void not only protects but also destroys, not by striking but by waiting. The ruler himself must be consumed by discipline to wield such a weapon, to sit in silence while others demand words, to hold back favor when others beg for recognition, to disappear when others crave your presence. This is not weakness but the highest form of control. The temptation to reveal oneself is immense. The temptation to explain is constant. But the one who yields to this temptation is no ruler, for he has placed his need to be understood above his need to command. Power belongs to the one who can endure being misunderstood, who can endure the hatred of silence, who can watch others squirm and resist the urge to relieve them. This is why many rulers fail. They cannot bear solitude. They crave adoration. They crave clarity. They crave to be loved. And so they squander the void. They spend their power in speeches, in decrees, in indulgent confessions. They trade the fear of absence for the fleeting comfort of applause. But applause fades, and the ruler who relies on it fades with it. To endure, one must become the silence itself, feeding men not with what they desire, but with what they cannot live without. Uncertainty, mystery, the abyss that compels their obedience. And so the law stands unbroken. When you offer them nothing, they give you everything. They offer you their strength to fill the emptiness, their loyalty to stave off uncertainty, their obedience to ward off fear, their devotion to give shape to what they cannot see. And in the end, they offer you their very selves, for men would rather be bound in chains of silence than drift unmoored in the chaos of the void. The void is not merely an instrument of power, it is the very condition in which power exists. Remove it, and politics collapses into noise. Preserve it, and politics endures even in ruin. Empires have risen and fallen on this principle, though few have named it. Rome mastered it when the Senate withheld decisions, forcing men to beg for verdicts that never came. Monarchs wielded it when they retreated into their palaces, allowing mystery to surround their persons until they appeared divine. Modern rulers still depend upon it, even when they cloak it with the language of transparency. They know instinctively that too much light blinds authority, that too much explanation kills obedience. Silence is not passivity. It is action in its purest form, action stripped of gesture, of noise, of evidence. It is the invisible hand that directs men without touching them. It is command without command, violence without blood, decree without signature. When a ruler withholds, he sets in motion forces greater than armies. He divides factions, stirs fears, ignites hopes, all without lifting a finger. In his absence, others act desperately, and in their desperation they reveal more than spies ever could. His silence becomes their confession. Those who misunderstand this law believe that generosity is the foundation of loyalty. They give offices, titles, gifts, and think that gratitude will bind men. But gratitude fades, gifts are forgotten, and generosity is soon treated as obligation. The one who gives too much creates not loyalty but resentment, for men come to believe that they are owed what they once received as favor. Yet the one who gives little, who forces his subjects to wait, to hunger, to yearn, creates a deeper attachment. For when the gift finally comes, it is treasured like a miracle. Scarcity magnifies value. Abundance destroys it. The void transforms even cruelty. A punishment executed swiftly is soon forgotten, its pain dulled by time. But a punishment delayed, uncertain, hanging over the condemned without end, becomes eternal. The lash scars the body, the threat scars the soul. A ruler who understands the void does not rush to destroy his enemies. He allows them to wait, to imagine, to torment themselves with possibilities. Each day they wake in dread, each night they sleep with unease, until the punishment becomes unnecessary, for they have already executed themselves in their own fear. Politics is theater, and theater depends not only on performance but on silence between lines. The audience leans forward when the actor pauses. Anticipation binds them more tightly than spectacle. So too with rulers. It is not the decree that enslaves, but the pause before it. It is not the army that terrifies, but the silence before it moves. It is not the punishment that commands obedience, but the uncertainty of when or if it will strike. In these intervals lies the true essence of command. The void is also the ground of manipulation. To manipulate is not to force men to act against their will, but to shape their will before they know it. And nothing shapes more deeply than uncertainty. In silence, men reveal themselves. They reveal their fears, their ambitions, their loyalties, their betrayals. Each one rushes to fill the emptiness in his own way, and in so doing, exposes his nature. The ruler watches and learns. He rewards those who reveal strength. He destroys those who reveal weakness, and he does all this without lifting his voice. Loyalty born from clarity is fragile, for clarity is temporary. But loyalty born from the void is unbreakable, for the void never resolves. A man who loves you for kindness will turn when kindness fades. A man who fears you for cruelty will rebel when cruelty becomes intolerable. But a man who fears the silence, who fears what he cannot measure, will never know when to rebel, will never know how, will never know with whom. He remains bound by the chain of uncertainty, shackled to an invisible master. The ruler must, however, guard against his own desire to escape the void. Power is lonely, and silence is heavy. To live as a mask, as an absence, is to live apart from the warmth of men. Many rulers fall because they crave affection. They crave to be known. They crave to be understood. They reveal themselves to ease their solitude, and in revealing they diminish themselves. The burden of command is not only to control others, but to control oneself, to resist the human need for recognition, to embrace invisibility, to become the void itself. The greatest danger to a ruler is not rebellion but overexposure. When he is seen too clearly, when his motives are laid bare, when his words flow too freely, he becomes ordinary. And once he is ordinary, he can be replaced. Power is not sustained by being one of many, but by being unlike all others. Mystery separates him, silence elevates him, absence immortalizes him. The ruler must therefore cultivate distance, even while standing among men, must cultivate silence, even while speaking, must cultivate invisibility, even while appearing in full view. So the void remains, eternal and merciless. It is the condition that makes politics possible, the law that shapes obedience, the shadow that outlives empires. Those who wield it rule not only over men, but over the fears and desires that govern men. Those who ignore it feed their subjects until they revolt, explain themselves until they are despised, expose themselves until they are destroyed. In the end, all rulers are measured not by what they gave, but by what they withheld. And always the same law returns, unbroken, unchanging. When you offer them nothing, they give you everything: their faith, their labor, their silence, their very selves. They surrender not because you forced them, but because they could not endure the abyss you placed before them. They filled it with their own devotion, and in so doing, they chained themselves to your will. Betrayal grows most easily in the soil of certainty. When a ruler reveals too much of his mind, when his intentions are known, when his decisions can be predicted, his rivals find the courage to strike, for they believe they have measured the risks. But when the ruler cloaks himself in the void, when his silence renders every calculation uncertain, betrayal loses its foundation. Who dares move against a man whose vengeance is unknown, whose reach cannot be measured, whose favor cannot be secured nor denied with confidence? Suspicion becomes paralysis, and paralysis preserves the throne more effectively than legions of guards. Virtue itself is a double-edged weapon in politics. If you display it openly, men expect it always. If you fail once, they call you hypocrite. If you succeed, they grow accustomed and no longer praise you. But when virtue is hidden, when it emerges sparingly, when it is seen not as habit but as rare concession, it is valued more than gold. Even mercy, when given rarely, is more feared and respected than constant kindness. The void teaches that scarcity elevates all things, even virtue. To appear too virtuous is to be ordinary. To appear unpredictable in virtue is to be feared. The same is true of cruelty. If cruelty is constant, men harden against it. They learn its measure. They adapt. But if cruelty is suspended in silence, if punishment lingers in uncertainty, if the threat hovers without descending, it becomes unbearable. Men can endure the whip, but they cannot endure the waiting. They can survive the wound, but they cannot survive the imagination of a wound that is not yet struck. The void is cruelty perfected because it makes men torment themselves. Ambition feeds upon clarity. The ambitious man studies the ruler's words, interprets his laws, anticipates his plans, and seizes the gaps. But the void starves ambition. It gives no words to twist, no plans to decipher, no intentions to exploit. The ambitious man is left blind, and in his blindness he stumbles. Those who rush forward fall first, consumed by their eagerness to seize what was never revealed. The void teaches patience, but few possess it, and so the impatient destroy themselves. Appearances govern politics more completely than truth, and appearances are most powerful when they conceal rather than reveal. A throne empty for a moment appears greater than one constantly occupied, for absence inflames the imagination. A ruler who speaks rarely commands more weight than one who fills the air with noise, for scarcity makes each word a treasure. Even the simplest gesture, a glance, a pause, a withheld smile, becomes heavy with significance when surrounded by silence. The void magnifies everything it touches, turning the smallest act into theater. Fear is not only a weapon, but the very currency of rule. Men may say they desire freedom, but what they truly desire is protection from the unknown. And protection is bought not by clarity, but by the suggestion that without the ruler's hand, chaos will devour them. The void amplifies this, for it creates a space where fear grows unchecked. They cannot know what lies ahead, and so they cling more tightly to the one who seems to hold the key. Thus the ruler becomes not merely master of men, but master of their survival instinct, and survival binds more tightly than love. Even in exile, the void follows. A fallen ruler who maintains silence retains more power than one who pleads his case. The exile who speaks is mocked or forgotten, but the exile who remains quiet, whose intentions are hidden, whose movements are rumored, becomes a phantom that haunts the halls of power. His enemies guard against his return more fiercely than they ever fought him on the throne. His absence becomes his greatest presence, his defeat his greatest weapon. For men fear not the defeated, but the silence of the defeated, the void that suggests return. The ruler who wishes to endure must learn to suffer misunderstanding. He must let men project upon him both hatred and reverence, both fear and hope, without rushing to correct them, for in their projections lies their servitude. To explain oneself is to surrender control of meaning. To remain silent is to retain mastery of interpretation. Let them accuse, let them praise, let them speculate endlessly. In their noise, your silence becomes the center around which all revolves. This is the curse of power as much as its necessity. To live in the void is to live unseen, even while seen by all. It is to wear the mask so long that the face beneath disappears. It is to be present everywhere and yet nowhere, spoken of endlessly yet never truly known. To command is to accept this exile within the throne itself, a solitude deeper than banishment, a silence louder than applause. Many rulers fail because they cannot bear this solitude. They seek companionship in clarity, in confession, in transparency. But the ruler who endures embraces the void as his only companion, and in that companionship finds dominion. So the law endures, merciless and inescapable. When you offer them nothing, they give you everything. They give you loyalty because they cannot endure uncertainty. They give you obedience because they cannot map your silence. They give you devotion because they must invent meaning to fill the emptiness. And in the end, they give you themselves, body and soul, because the void consumes all else. The void is a weapon that does not strike but waits, and in its waiting it erodes the will of those who face it. A sword cuts once, but silence cuts forever. Men grow tired of resisting what they cannot see, weary of plotting against what they cannot measure. Their energy dissolves in endless speculation. Their courage wastes away in unanswered questions. To fight an enemy who does not move is to fight shadows, and in time the fighter turns his sword upon himself. This is why rulers who master the void rarely need to raise their armies. Their enemies destroy themselves before the battle begins. Alliances, too, are shaped by absence more than presence. When a ruler gives constant assurances, his allies grow bold and careless, leaning too heavily upon him, demanding more than he can sustain. But when he withholds, when he speaks little and promises less, his allies guard his favor as if it were gold. They fear losing what was never fully given. They cling to the fragments he releases. They fight each other for the smallest sign of recognition. The alliance built upon silence endures longer than the one built upon abundance, for scarcity binds more tightly than generosity. Deception thrives in noise, but it is born in silence. Words can be questioned, gestures can be exposed, but silence cannot be refuted. To say nothing is to leave every possibility open, to allow men to deceive themselves more effectively than you could ever deceive them. The ruler need not invent lies if he can endure the discipline of withholding the truth. His subjects will write their own stories, each one convinced it was his design, and in their competing illusions, his dominion is secured. Virtue, when it appears rarely, has greater force than when it is constant. A single act of mercy, withheld until the moment of greatest tension, binds more loyalties than a lifetime of kindness. A single word of justice, uttered after long silence, is remembered longer than endless speeches on righteousness. The void teaches that value is not inherent but created by scarcity. Even gold would be dirt if it lay scattered in every field, but a stone becomes treasure when it is rare. So too with virtue. It shines brightest when it emerges from shadow. The ruler who cannot bear the weight of silence is doomed. He reveals himself too quickly. He explains too often. He gives too freely. And in doing so, he becomes common. Common rulers are discarded like worn garments, for men respect only what they cannot fully grasp. The throne is not sustained by abundance, but by distance, not by generosity, but by restraint. Those who endure in power are those who master the art of remaining unseen even while they stand before all, of remaining unheard even when their name is on every tongue. And so the lesson repeats, sharper each time. When you offer them nothing, they give you everything. They surrender not because they are forced, but because they cannot endure the emptiness you create. In their desperation to escape it, they chain themselves to you, and in their chains you are free. Power ends as it begins, not in the noise of declarations, but in the silence of inevitability. A ruler who has mastered the void does not need to announce his legacy, for it has already been written in the minds of those who feared losing him. His enemies will tell his story with trembling. His allies will preserve his silence as scripture, and his people will carry his absence like a weight that does not lift. The ruler dies, but the void remains, shaping generations long after the crown has passed. Every man hungers for certainty, yet certainty is the most fragile of gifts. It can be broken, disproven, forgotten. The void cannot. It endures because it never resolves. It keeps men bound to what they cannot touch, forever circling around the figure they cannot fully know. The wise ruler leaves behind not monuments of stone, but questions without answers, shadows without sources, gestures without explanations. These are stronger than marble, for marble crumbles, but mystery multiplies. There is no virtue without scarcity, no loyalty without fear, no obedience without uncertainty. Men serve most faithfully, not the ruler who reveals himself, but the one who refuses. They cling to what they cannot define. They protect what they cannot measure. They devote themselves to what they cannot possess. In their struggle to close the emptiness, they give away their strength, their will, their freedom, until nothing remains but the silence that governs them. To lead is to accept this solitude, this burden of withholding, this exile in plain sight. It is to wear the mask without ever removing it, to speak rarely, to give little, to remain distant even when surrounded by thousands. It is to know that men will love you, hate you, praise you, condemn you all for reasons you never gave them. And it is to accept that this is the only way power endures. So remember the law that outlasts all others. When you offer them nothing, They give you everything. They give you obedience without demand, loyalty without proof, devotion without reason. They give you their lives because they cannot endure the abyss you have placed before them. And when they have given everything, when nothing remains but their dependence upon you, then you have mastered the highest form of rule, not command by force, but command by silence. The void has spoken, and its voice is eternal.